Now, the last time that we were here talking about King of the Hill, or should that be the King of the Hill, I'm sure someone will tell me in the comments, but the last time was in the Peggy Horror Picture Show, an episode which covered the Hill family becoming immersed in drag culture and the lives of drag queens in a way that was positive and uplifting and found a good message in the shared struggles of femininity across various groups.
Aren't you all more impressed by women who are fancier?
Wispy women are a dime a dozen.
It was a little unclear in some language, and some of the examples, whether it was truly about gay men drag queens or just drag queens who were actually also trans women who hadn't transitioned yet, but for an episode that came out in 2007 and did seem to be doing its best to be kind in the representation that it was going for, I found it to be enjoyable, and the mild uncertainty to not detract too heavily from those pluses.
It's so nice to have a friend who's strong enough to push her way through a sale.
But there was one other episode that people seemed surprised that I hadn't mentioned at all when it came to discussing King of the Hill crossing over in some small way with themes of trans analogy or narrative. And that was Season 9's Episode 5, Dale to the Chief, from 2 years earlier in 2005.
I wonder if I got anything. I'm not gonna get anything.
Now, the reason I didn't discuss this was because there seemed to be a far more clear-cut queer episode to sink my teeth into. But now, upon second inspection of the series, I think I'm happy to give this episode, all about Hank struggling with issues around his identification on his driver's license and the bureaucratic nightmare of getting ID changed, a bit of an analysis. You might already be able to see where we're gonna go with this analogy there, cause it's admittedly a little obvious, but trust me, it's a hell of a lot more obvious as an allegory when you get into the episode itself. So that's what we're talking about. And for those who don't know what King of the Hill is, it's an animated sitcom set in small-town Texas, which utilizes the particular culture and identity of that area for the development of its characters and presentation. As we see the lives of the Hill family, Hank Hill, a propane salesman who sorta connects with ideas of stoic manliness and well-meaning but ultimately confused interpretations of the modern world.
Well, instead of letting it out, try holding it in.
Peggy Hill, a substitute teacher for Spanish despite not being good with the language, and a bit egotistical in general, as well as being more varied in the way that she approaches her own life and what she wants to see herself doing.
Me llamo?
Ah, you speak Spanish, in a way.
And Bobby Hill, the teenage kid who is kinda just a nice guy, if a little bit dense at times.
That's my purse.
Don't be afraid to shout it.
That's my purse!
Oh, Bobby is also a centre point for us seeing a lot of Hank's masculinity by virtue of how much Bobby denies falling into gender binary roles, and is often willing to explore outside of the label of boy stuff to generally pretty great success for him. There are a host of friends and side characters too, because this is an animated sitcom and those things have like 100 characters each, but that is the core group.
I am Gilbert Fontaine de la Tour d'Autrive.
Let's just get into the episode. I've wasted enough time here. The episode starts us off with setting up what will be the core storyline that we are focusing on here. Specifically that Hank is waiting on a new driver's license to turn up in the mail, and he's been waiting for it to arrive for a while, which he attributes specifically to the fact that they have some new tech stuff on it, so that must be taking longer to get done or something.
I hear the new security holograms are outstanding.
Dale, of course, has some elaborate conspiracy theory bullshit reason for why it hasn't arrived yet, some psyop shit that he believes very strongly, and the rest of the group just kinda casually tries not to engage with him because it is confusing as hell.
For all those words to come out together, or did they just fall out randomly?
The driver's license then properly turns up, and Hank walks back in to tell the rest of his family about it, and reads out the details on his license to all of them. However, while reading the details, he suddenly gets snagged on a little something that isn't the way it's supposed to be. And that's the fact that his sex is listed as F for female rather than the M for male that Hank so clearly strongly identifies with.
Now, where did I put my pantyhose?
Bobby, living room.
This revelation is humorous for the rest of the family, presumably because of the comedy of someone being misidentified as a gender that they definitely don't ascribe to, and the idea of a masculine, manly man being viewed by anything as a woman. And Hank is also very clearly upset by it.
Purse that would look so good with...
Peggy, living room.
He complains that despite Peggy's insistence of how it doesn't really matter, and that nobody even checks them anymore, that what happens if he dies and gets put in the ladies' morgue based off the ID, which is funny because I think morgues are agender, and also that he would get on the news for it. Now, with this initial premise set up, you can sort of see what the trans discussion of this episode is going to be, and it's the way that Hank, inadvertently, and in his own cis manner and cis storyline, has allegorically driven up right next to a very real thing that a lot of trans people deal with.
What if I died in some car accident and because of my license they put me in the ladies' morgue?
Namely the difficulties and concerns around state identification and who we identify as personally. See, this exact problem that Hank is running into, and considering the ramifications of, is something that is also dealt with by people who have transitioned but haven't had their IDs updated yet to reflect that due to either not having gone through the very rigorous and painful process of doing it, not meeting the obnoxious and hard requirements that certain states or countries put upon changing your gender markers, or perhaps they live in a location where you literally cannot change those markers at all.
Since 2018, trans people have been able to get their driver's licenses changed in Florida. That policy is officially rescinded.
And so the fear of what happens if they die or something happens to them, and then because of a single little letter on a piece of paper or scrap of plastic, they get misidentified as something that they are not, and forced into a system that matches a gender they do not belong to. I mean, that whole bit about making the news is absolutely a big fear for a lot of trans people, because we have evidence of often trans women getting killed in a car accident or murdered or dying in some other way, only for the police and the hospitals and the news to then receive the information which only covers their assigned sex and their assigned name. So they effectively get dead-named and misgendered by the entire world thanks to that ID not being reflective of them, and that whole thing happens upon them being killed. So Hank does have a fair reason to be concerned here, especially because in this case it might lead to him getting misinterpreted as a trans man by a bunch of different authorities, or as a trans woman who just hasn't done any physical transitioning yet. Hank then proceeds to get reamed out by the rest of his friends over the license mistake, with them calling him Mrs. Hill and engaging in what we would call comedy-centric emasculating.
Should I say Miss Hill? Can't go wrong with Ms.
Yeah,
The action by which they are making fun of his gender through the lens of this mistake. Something which irritates Hank because he just doesn't understand why it's so funny to think of him as a woman.
thinks me being mistaken for a lady is funny. It's not.
Now, I'm sure that out there somewhere there is a person who has written a very convincing headcanon revolving around the facts of this episode to prove that Hank is actually a stealth trans man who is being irritated by this and downplaying all of it because he doesn't want people to find out the truth of his past, and so all of this feeds into such a trans interpretation as that. But that's not what we're going to be discussing or doing here today. We're going to be sticking straight and true to the belief that Hank Hill is just a cis man who is dealing with the obnoxious nature of having who you are as a person brought into question by a misapplication of your identity through the governmental apparatus, and considering how that connects in a subtle and synonymous way with the experiences of trans people.
If you showed Dale your lady license, it would cheer him up.
It doesn't always need to be fuel for the fan and shit. Sometimes it can just be seen as a metaphor. Hank, after being annoyed enough by this mockery of him, heads on over to what might be the DMV based on what I know of the United States, though I guess it could just be a government agency place that also deals with that shit. I'm going to say DMV for now till the episode proves me wrong, and he complains about the fact that this license is incorrect, saying to the lady behind the counter that he obviously isn't a woman, so this license isn't right, so can someone change it?
Now, if you could just change it for me.
We just don't change driver's licenses anymore.
Oh, Hank, trust me, if that worked, there would be probably about 50% of trans people not dealing with so much behind-the-scenes bullshit. The argument of, look at what I'm clearly trying to present myself as, is not something that the government has ever really cared too much for. And the lady behind the counter absolutely follows that trend by telling him that if he didn't want to be assigned as female on the license, then he shouldn't have ticked F when he was filling out that form.
Clearly not one.
Then why did you mark F on your application?
I didn't.
Hank responds with that he didn't do that. He didn't tick the damn letter. And this actually makes me wonder a little bit with this back and forth, because I'm not sure how right that is from the lady behind the counter. Like, for me to get my license updated with a different gender marker, I had to go through a whole process by which an officiate recognized and signed off on my gender change and confirmed that it wasn't just, like, me doing a bit or something. Was it different back then in the United States of America, and you could just change your gender on things so quickly and easily on government forms? The answer is absolutely no, but for the purpose of this episode, I guess the lady behind the counter at this agency place doesn't actually give a shit about any of this, so is just saying whatever it takes to get Hank out of her fucking way as quickly as possible.
Can't you just fix it? I brought my birth certificate.
I'm not the post office.
Hank then gets hit with the big ol' whammy of government bureaucracy as he tries to get them to just change that single letter with the evidence of his birth certificate to show what his actual gender marker should be, only to find out that he has to go through a whole extensive nightmare process of sending the information to various different places, which will apparently take weeks.
Bingo, they'll square it away in 4 to 6 weeks.
To put a cherry on top of this whole shit cake, the lady then calls him Mom because, according to her, he can't sue her if she refers to him correctly in accordance to that driver's license. I guess it's a bit of malicious misgendering here to really cement the obnoxiousness that Hank is being faced with. Yep, he well and truly is getting the whole trans experience of the process. Painful and difficult systems that almost seem as if they were designed to specifically stop you from getting your gender updated to reflect reality, and then also piece of shit fucking people who keep taking all of that as an opportunity to incorrectly gender you based on the thing that is clearly wrong and that you want to change.
Now, if you'll just step aside, ma'am.
Ma'am?
I can't get sued if I call you what's on the license.
Hopefully, somewhere in all this storyline, it's giving people who are watching this an idea of how tricky it is to go through this. And maybe some people who watch it might have thought of the trans people in their own lives, or the trans people on the news or on TV shows, and wondered if that community has to go through the difficulty that is getting presented here just to have the right gender markers on their ID. I mean, this isn't a direct comparison within the show so far. They're not highlighting trans people as an idea, but it would be foolish, especially based on the comments that I've received recommending this episode to me, to not realise that sometimes these stories, which grow close to other groups' lived experiences, can be used to get people to think about those communities, as well as by the community themselves to feel seen in some small way, because they've experienced the same thing that this character is now going through.
It says I'm a female.
And how can I help you?
Well, I'm clearly not.
That is the hook for wanting to discuss and consider and analyse this after all, and if you are one of the people who asked me to do this, here you go. And yeah, you lot were indeed right. There is certainly something here to think about. Hank runs into a completely new issue with the DPS, the overarching branch of the government, I guess, that has license underneath it and whose agency that actually might have been beforehand, so we'll call them DPS now, as they refuse to edit his license due to the fact that it might breach national security, leading to this fantastic line that I'm sure plenty of trans people have spammed like crazy all over the internet and in DMs to their friends.
What does the contents of my underpants have to do with national security?
The mockery continues at home, this time with a somewhat serious thought from Bobby about the fact that if Hank was indeed identified as a woman, that would make him lesbians with Peggy, which leads to Peggy thinking out that thought experiment even further to annoy Hank.
That would make you and Mom lesbians.
That's it. The cable's gone.
When arriving back at the DPS, or the DMV, or whichever set of letters he's going to for all this, I think it's the DPS, Hank learns that he needs to get a document confirming his gender identity to actually get that marker changed at all. And aha! Yeah! That is exactly the kind of shit that I was getting ready for.
What? You want documentation of my gender? I don't get it.
And despite Hank's insistent gender essentialism about how his Adam's apple should clearly mark him as a man, and so that should be enough by itself to get the ID changed, the employee doesn't accept it, because the government doesn't accept that. Though it's interesting looking at this, because the times have been kinda reversed on this storyline, and that these days in the US, people are getting harassed and gendered specifically for specific biological components that are not actually necessarily the deterministic factor behind gender identity.
Adam's apple I've been yelling at you with, proof enough?
No.
Also, to be clear here, for anyone who doesn't know, everybody has an Adam's apple. It's just the thing we use to refer to the cartilage in front of the larynx box, and while it is generally more prominent in those with higher testosterone, you can also find examples of men with no Adam's apples, and women with Adam's apples.
Comes from someone asking about cisgender girls, because everyone has Adam's apple.
It's just a badly named bit of the body, and a serious case of us as a whole taking something that is not at all sexually dimorphic and acting as if it is based on a name. Hank starts getting angry at this point with the whole annoying system that he keeps having to go through. Complained about how the whole thing is making him feel both ignored and violated at the same time. And yeah, brother, you're starting to get it. You're beginning to understand the trans experience of these governmental systems.
I didn't know it was possible to feel ignored and violated at the same time.
Now, our next scene involves the other storyline of the episode, and this storyline crashing into one another, as Dale has been going through a whole experience himself, which has led to him renouncing his conspiracy theory ways and becoming a hardcore American government supporter, much to the chagrin of Hank, who is currently dealing with the American government being shit and flawed, in response to Hank challenging Dale on the fact that if the government is so perfect, why did it send him an ID with the wrong damn fucking marker? To which Dale then says that if the government claims it, then Hank must be a woman.
Because you're a woman. It makes so much sense.
What?
It's all gotten pretty weird, and Hank gets a real blast of sexism and strange shit from Dale here as the man clings to the fact that the government can't get things wrong, and that if Hank's ID says that he is female, then that makes him female. Jesus Christ, Hank is really getting a lot of the trans experience in this episode, huh? I thought it would be a lot. I didn't think it would be, like, everything.
Whoa. I think you've had enough to drink, sweetheart.
It's kind of branched out from just bureaucracy shit and is now infecting the relationships between himself and his friends, who are misgendering him heavily and interpreting him through this new lens assigned by the gender marker. When Hank goes to the doctor to try and get this whole gender document thing sorted out, he then runs into the next difficulty for himself, wherein the doctor cannot just confirm that he is a man from visual elements, as the idea of gender has somewhat expanded, and that there exists surgeries and HRT that can make it more complicated to just see someone and instantly know what gender identity they are.
Whoa, I'm not signing a paper that just says anything. Those days went out with house call.
This is where things get a little bit tricky, because it's hard to say exactly what here is being what. Like, what I'm saying is that a lot of this really feels transphobic right in this moment. We're effectively getting positioned here that gender cannot be so easily viewed anymore because there are trans people out there who muddy the waters by looking so much like the gender they identify as, and that's why this doctor can't just look at someone and call them what they look like anymore. It's not saying that trans people are the gender that they identify as, but it is instead saying that because a trans person can get surgeries to look like that the medical profession needs to do more invasive testing to ensure that they get what is being considered here as the real sex.
Made by God and the ones jerry-rigged out of a toe and some old skin?
Legally, no.
Hank also does a bit of transphobia by saying that surely the doctor can tell the difference between his own God-given dick and the dick made out of toes and random flesh, which is a demeaning and mocking interpretation of the difference between cis and trans bodies, that the doctor doesn't push back on, except to say that legally speaking, he isn't allowed to make such a determining judgment. This whole scene really beats the shit out of the allegory that we have been running with, by just sort of jumping us of a whole host of transphobic attitudes. Transphobic attitudes that you might argue are realistic to the time period and location that the show is set in, and sure, that's true. I don't disagree that it makes sense for these people here to act like this, but the fact that it makes sense doesn't mean I have to enjoy it, or enjoy the way that it kind of runs into my symbology of the episode and sort of derails it like another train coming in.
Gender's not as cut and dried as it used to be, Mr. Hill. There's transsexual hormone therapy.
Dale and Hank get into a scrap, as Dale tries to paint the American flag onto the roof of the Hill's house. And then when Dale runs away, he calls the Department of Homeland Security and turns Hank in as an anti-American for defacing a flag, making nasty remarks about the government, and also for trying to change his identity. Ooh, scary stuff.
He is also in the process of altering his identity. Hank Hill.
Even if he is, I guess, trying to get it legally changed within the American system they have built in, I suppose that's not good enough for Dale, who in this current form is like the end boss villain of all those laws in the worst states right now, where they ask people to turn in trans people trying to transition and the supportive parents of trans kids.
Texas is going after the parents of trans children.
A real piece of shit is what I'm getting at here. All of this, though, gets resolved pretty quickly when the FBI realizes that Hank is very immediately not the kind of person that they are interested in. I guess visually profiling this straight white dude as not a threat to national security for probably racist reasons when you get down to it.
It's illegal for us to profile anyone, but I know what I'm looking for, but you're not it.
And then Hank gets nominated by the Texas Propane Society for Texas Propane Woman of the Year, the whole gender marker spiraling out of control into other organizations, I guess, because how did that organization even get their hands on that one misgendering piece of ID, actually?
It's addressed to Mrs. Hill, but it's from the Texas Propane Gas Association.
Like, did Hank update them on the new ID? Maybe there are automated systems in place for them, but I will tell you here as a fact in the real world that you have to go through every single fucking place to inform them of your new gender marker on a license normally. There are still places that I get emails or letters from with the wrong name or gender for me because I just forgot to tell them. And I got that shit changed years ago. This final event, though, pushes Hank to the brink, as he decides to head down to the DPS and get his gender recognized properly once and for all, leading to Dale, who is listening in on him, calling the police on the location, and even calling Hank a he/she as he does so, because I guess we hadn't really seen a slur this episode yet, so now seemed like the perfect time to drop one in.
And everyone will see Hank Hill for what he truly is. An America-hating he/she.
I mean, it actually doesn't make a lot of sense as a slur coming from Dale, seeing as he's made it clear earlier that he fully recognizes the government's version of events. Shouldn't he just be calling Hank a she then, seeing as Hank is recognized as a female? I don't know. It looks like we just wanted to do a bit of transphobia here in the final few minutes of the episode, I guess. Hank marches down to the DPS, demands that they finally change his marker because he's completely fucking sick of all this bullshit, and then he gets some surprise help from Dale, who's been convinced to aid his friend and use the new knowledge that he has of all the government workers to basically barrage them into changing that gender marker and setting the episode back on course for us to pick up next episode with Hank being recognized as a man again and nothing much changing at all.
Man, that you helped my disturbed friend here.
I'm sorry, sir, but the state requires that...
The episode ends with Dale turning to Hank and asking him seriously if he is a man. And when Hank answers in the affirmative, Dale agrees to take that from him on faith. A somewhat positive and progressive end to the whole thing.
Are you a man?
Yes, Dale.
I'm willing to take that on faith.
I guess. Contextually to the time period and location, the person we're talking about here, let's call it a win for the transit allegory and a positive with what I've been running with so far.
But if the government is right and you really are a woman, they shouldn't have caved so easily.
So that's the episode. And I think we can see here that what we are looking at is a lot of stuff that is not necessarily trans, but does sort of come across in a way that I'm sure trans and cis people can both connect with and connect lines from it to situations that the trans community faces in the real world and our real lives.
Nobody even checks IDs anymore.
But what if I die?
Hank is experiencing the difficulty of your gender identity not matching the one the government believes that he has. And he completely loses his shit over the course of that experience. It gives weight to the frustration and anger that is felt by showcasing exactly how that can develop, despite the fact that during the course of it, it might have engaged in a little bit of transphobic rhetoric and some pretty weirdly confusing ideas about actual trans people, who mostly just exist within the episode, off to the side, in a predominantly unmentioned and lightly touched upon parallel bubble space.
Transsexual hormone therapy, plastic surgery.
Can't you tell the difference?
King of the Hill does do something here, don't get me wrong, and understanding that kind of something is, I think, valuable at the very least to getting ideas of how trans people or cis people can find narratives that speak to us where they're unknown, especially a narrative that we haven't seen really discussed anywhere else. That people can create and see themselves reflected in spaces that don't initially aim to speak to us, especially when they don't normally find it. And that's that.
Show some gratitude.
If you liked what I said here, or enjoyed what I did, or were one of those people who suggested for me to finally cover this episode, then that's great. I hope you found it to be what you wanted, and that's all that I can really ask for. If you really like what I've done here, a great way to show that is by going to my Patreon or my Ko-Fi and subscribing there. The names of those in the fired run-up category should be scrolling past the screen right now, and I'm really appreciative of everyone who helps to fund the channel and keep it going. The money from there goes towards paying my bills like food, power, internet, rent, and cat, all of which allows me to then focus on making the videos and finding the resources to analyze them, something which can end up being quite time intensive. So having that paid for, especially when I can't so readily rely upon YouTube income or sponsorships to help keep it going, is hugely important. And it's reassuring to see that people want to be involved in that way. I also keep feeling like I want to do other stuff with my Patreon, so if you have any suggestions, I'd love to hear them and maybe institute something going into the next year. And on the note of suggestions, I'm also thankful to those who engage with this video in different ways, like sharing it to people who they think could do with hearing it, or checking out my other videos that I've made, or commenting with content that I should check out. It is, after all, where the idea for this one came, as I've said a few times, and so having people give me that initial impetus to go digging is really helpful. So yeah, a big thanks to everyone in the audience who is involved in keeping what I am doing here going, and hope that you all have a great day.